My brokenness is a gift. What am I saying? I'm saying that it's because of my weaknesses that I was able to experience God's power. And it was God's power that delivered me from that addiction. I love what the Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. I feel like he painted the perfect picture of what happens when we embrace our weaknesses and how it attracts God's power. Like, think about this for a second. God's divine power is attracted to my weaknesses. And he says this, he says, my grace is sufficient for you. This is God telling Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Wow. Power is perfected in weakness. And then this is Paul. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. So in my last video, I shared a bit about my testimony, and I shared how it was God's grace that delivered me from that addiction to corn. And in this video, I want to continue and I want to dissect this verse a little bit and highlight some key words that will help paint the perfect picture, in my opinion, on God's grace coming to assist us in our moments of weakness. And the first word I want to highlight is the word grace. And this word grace in Greek is the word charis. And it means God's favor, kindness, and goodwill, which is freely given by God to humanity. Now, in context, this verse, God's grace, is described as sufficient for Paul. God is telling Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, meaning it is more than enough to meet his needs and empower him in his weaknesses. God is telling Paul, my grace is all that you need. My grace will empower you in the moments of your weakness. Moments where you are weak. My grace is all that you need. You don't need anything else. All you need is my grace, and that will be enough for you. This grace is not just about forgiveness, but also about God's empowering presence in the lives of all believers, enabling us to live out our new identity in Christ. It is through this grace that believers are able to experience God's strength and power even in their moments of weakness. God, thank you for your grace. The second word I want to highlight is sufficient, and the Greek word is archeo. Now, don't come at me if I'm mispronouncing these Greek words, all right? I'm not an expert in Greek vocabulary, so I'm trying my best, so bear with me. So the Greek word is archeo, and it conveys the idea of being enough or adequate, indicating that grace is fully capable of meeting all needs and challenges. Grace is fully capable of meeting all needs and challenges. Wow. In context of this verse, it emphasizes that God's grace is entirely adequate to sustain and empower Paul, even in his weaknesses. God's grace is able to sustain you and I, even in moments of our weaknesses. This sufficiency of grace assures believers that they can rely on God's provision and strength in every circumstance, knowing that grace is more than enough to carry them through. Grace is more than enough to carry you through. Now, the third word is the word power, and we hear this all the time. Power, God's power. God's divine power, and the Greek word is dunamis, and it refers to strength, ability, or miraculous power. In context, it highlights the divine power of Christ that is made perfect in human weakness. The divine power of Christ is made perfect. Hear that. Catch that. The divine power of Christ is made perfect in human weakness. Again, Paul is emphasizing that it is through our limitations and weaknesses that the power of Christ is most clearly demonstrated and experienced. It is through our limitations and weaknesses. It is through our limitations and weaknesses. We all got limitations. We all got weaknesses. And it is through our limitations and weaknesses that God's power is clearly expressed and demonstrated. A lot of us, we see our limitations, our weaknesses as misfortunes, right? I'm not great at this. I'm weak in this area. I have this limitation. I have that limitation. I can't do this. I can't do that. And we look at it like it's part of our downfall. It's part of why we can't do certain things. It's part of why we hold back. And here Paul is saying, I boast in my weaknesses. Because of my weaknesses, God's power is expressed and demonstrated. So, in a sense, it's a blessing that we have limitations and weaknesses. For me, for example, I'm gonna give a vulnerable example. I don't think I'm that much good of a communicator, right? And I listen to these wonderful communicators speak, and I'm like, wow, like look at how great they can communicate. And I'm like, God, how could you call somebody like me to communicate and try to effectively communicate this gospel, this word, and I'm not that great of a communicator? This is an area where I'm weak in. It's a limitation for me. And God's like, great. That's good. That's better for you. Because if you think about it, most great communicators can rely on that skill. I have to rely on God's power. There's an advantage on my part. Because God can take my limited communication skills and he can anoint it. And it can be powerful and effective. But we're talking about this in the sense of God empowering us to overcome things in our lives that maybe hold us down, things that maybe we're ashamed of. Maybe it's hardships. Maybe it's tribulations. Maybe it's a storm. Maybe it's dealing with some kind of addiction. God's power is attracted to our weaknesses, his divine power, his miraculous power. In the case of me being delivered from Corinth, it was God's miraculous power that delivered me from that addiction and set me free. This power is not just about physical strength, but encompasses the transformative and sustaining power of God in the life of a believer. It reassures believers that God's power is actively at work within them. God's power is actively at work in you, in me, enabling us, enabling you, enabling me to live out our new identity in Christ. Powerful. The fourth word is perfected, and the Greek word is teleutai. Again, don't come at me for mispronouncing these words. This word conveys the idea of bringing something to completion, fulfillment, or maturity. In context, it means that God's power reaches its full expression and effectiveness in our weaknesses. Wow. God's power is perfected, reaches its full expression in my weaknesses. That should be enough for us to start boasting in our weaknesses. For when we are weak, we are actually made strong, because our weakness becomes a portal for God's power to flow. That is a blessing. My friend, your weakness is not misfortune is not your downfall. Your weakness is a portal for God's power. God's power is attracted to your weakness. Now, what am I not saying? I'm not saying that I need to go and cause some kind of brokenness as a reaction of my weakness to try to attract God's power. Like, I'm not going to go out and do dumb stuff, if I can be blunt with you, dumb things to try to conjure up God's power. Oh, God, I made this dumb mistake because of my weakness, and I'm intentionally trying to provoke God's power to come in my life and assist me. That's not what I'm saying. That's immaturity, and we got to mature away from that. I'm not saying that any of us is doing that, but that's not what I'm saying in this video. I'm not saying that we are to go out and do things out of our weaknesses to try to conjure up God's power and use that as an excuse and say, oh, well, you know what? It's good for me to do that because now God sees that I'm in need of his power. No. We realize that we are weak, that we are incapable of certain things. And we become dependent upon God. In a sense, it brings us to our knees in complete surrenderance unto God. And it brings us to a place of dependency. That's why I open up this video with my brokenness is a gift from God, because my brokenness keeps me on my knees and dependent and submitted to God. But I'm not going to go out and do things that are going to cause me pain and keep me broken. Okay, I had to distinguish that. Paul is highlighting that it is through human limitations that the strength and power of Christ are most clearly demonstrated and experienced. This understanding encourages believers to rely on God's strength, knowing that his power is fully realized in their moments of weakness. And the last word is weakness. The Greek word is asthenia. This term refers to a lack of strength or infirmity, which can be physical, emotional, or spiritual. In context, it often highlights human limitations and the opportunity for God's power to be made perfect in those limitations. It often highlights human limitations and the opportunity for God's power to be made perfect in those limitations. Paul emphasizes that God's grace is sufficient, that his power is perfected in our weaknesses, encouraging believers to rely on God's strength rather than their own. My brokenness, my weaknesses kept me dependent on God, on his power. I knew I couldn't deliver myself from corn. Just like I knew I couldn't stop smoking cigarettes on my own. That's another testimony I'll share in another video, how God miraculously delivered me from nicotine overnight. Crazy story. God's strength, it's not my own. I couldn't deliver myself. So I said, God, help me. I can't do it on my own. I am weak in this area. And God was like, all right, bet. I got you. And he empowered me. And he continues to empower me daily. And this is not just a one-time thing. God's power is actively at work inside of us. And that is exactly how I overcame that addiction, was by the power of God. He noticed I was weak. I cried out to him. He responded and he said, I got you, son. I got you. And I believe God is saying that to everyone who may be struggling with some kind of addiction today. Maybe it's not corn. Maybe it's something else. And you clicked on this video. This is for you too. I'm talking to you too. God is ever ready to help. His power is attracted to your weakness. And he's saying, son and daughter, I got you. I got you. Maybe you have a bad attitude problem and you need help with it. It's an area where you're weak in. Maybe you don't know how to communicate to people. Maybe you don't know how to communicate to your spouse. Maybe you don't know how to communicate your emotions to your spouse. So you get triggered. You get defensive. You have a limitation. It's a weakness. And God is saying, I got you. I got you. Let me work. He said, let me cook. He got you. Trust him. Depend on him. Don't run away because of your weaknesses, because of your limitations. God is saying, no, that's great. That's what I need. That's what I need to work. I need that. Come here. I can use that. I can use your weakness. And I can do things that you can never do. Don't run away from God because of your weaknesses or your limitations. Run towards God. Surrender your weaknesses to him. And let him empower you. Trust that he will do it because he will. He said he would. And God is not a God who will lie. If God lied, he couldn't be God. So, I hope this video encouraged some of you. I hope you were able to see this picture that Paul painted so perfectly for us believers, to rely and depend on God's strength and not on our own. Thank you guys for watching. Again, if you found value in this video, hit that like button, subscribe. Don't miss out on any other videos that I'm releasing. I promise they're going to be really good. I encourage you guys to hit that notification bell so you will be notified whenever I do release a video. All right. I'll see you guys in the next one. God bless y'all. Peace.